Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. It is Character Clipping stream number 119 for, what is it, April 10th, 2023. Finally got the date corrected on that. I was scrambling for baggies prior to the show, so I wasn't entirely ready. So we've got a whole bunch to talk about tonight. Our topic is the best of World War I. I've been asked if Ted Racer is going to show up on this list. It's very likely. So we will look forward to that conversation. Hopefully people can stop in. Let me click a couple buttons here to make sure that everything works properly. We are actually not drinking anything tonight because it is not going to play nice with some medication that I am on, so I've decided to just avoid it. I got a glass of water here instead. So no spiritus beverage for me, unfortunately. We are clipping. I forgot to put it on the shelf because we're a very slapdash operation here at Ardwulf's Lair. Musket and Pike dual pack. I started clipping this some time ago and haven't really looked at it since then, so we are looking at it again tonight. We will still not finish it because it is kind of a big thing. So and we are gonna start off by I'll talk about that in a second. So before we get started, let me remind everybody, please do thumbs up the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. Special shout out to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair. That reminds me to put the banner up. Thanks to Doug Cooley for stepping up to the hero patron level for this week. So much appreciated, Doug. So before we go any further here, I got all kind of windows open and they're all in the wrong place. So did I close that? Well, shit. No, here it is. Okay, cool. So let's say hello to the folks who have popped in to visit us so far this evening, starting with Alan Salazar, Bill Simone, Board Gaming Geezer, Krusty Captain Cyber, Field Marshal, Dale Brady, Daniel Brown, David Zell, Desktop Grenadiers, Douglas Gearhart, Egrut, HUN644, the legend himself, Fucko, is here. Jason Williams, Jeff Beeler, Joe Okabayashi, Joe Perez, Joel, John Longshore is in the house. John Nolan, John Clark, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Mark McNair, Mark Hodgkinson, Matt Davidson, Meandering Mike, Michael Simon, Neil Bedke, Perfidious Albion is here. Philip Musket, welcome to the stream if this is your first time here. Rick Cox, Rob Johnson, Rob Moffat, Scott Bell, Stacking Limit, Steve-O, Tim Greenhaw, Tim Zales, Wade Moore, William Aarons, and William Bird. So I will apologize if I missed anybody there, but it's YouTube's fault as usual. I'll more about that in a second. So last week we got an unboxing video out of Fall Blau. Hopefully we will be following up on that with some additional material. Farshad Niazi, welcome back. Nice to see you. 6 Actual as well. So hopefully we will be following up on that. I would like to issue a correction and or clarification. It's really a correction from last week's show where we talked about Jaws of Victory being part of the Victory in the West system, and that's kind of true, but the signature element of that system is the variable strength chits, which Jaws of Victory actually does not have. They are static values based on the unit's class, which you then get a strength marker that goes under the chit and which is hidden, which is very interesting actually, because it described to me by the designer as an attempt to use the Overlord Killing Ground system to model that campaign. And the other inspiration was Operation Typhoon, both of which do in fact have the random strength chits. So that is very interesting. I've got a decent collection of World War I games at this point. Not a ton, but not zero. So Frank, thanks for stopping by. Vicky as well. Thanks for coming tonight. And Brian Foley, if I didn't get to you. So we do have a show on with Dan tomorrow, so tune in for that. And I guess I'll mention that again, that the Tuesday show should henceforth be broadcast on both channels. Now, I don't vouch that you're going to see all the chat messages in both places. I'm not 100% sure that's working as intended, but we're going to explore some additional options for that as well in the coming weeks. But probably not materializing earlier than Buckeye Game Fest, which is the last week of this month. John Longshore, DG's Storm of Steel is not going to make this list. However, I feel that Storm of Steel is a bit underappreciated for what it is. I think there's a pretty good game in there, obscured by a fairly crappy rule book. That is a Joe Miranda design. I no longer own it. So there's two versions of Storm of Steel. There's like the original version, and then they did an expansion slash update kit, which is really an update kit. I mean, it's an expansion too. You get some more stuff in there, but you really want the updated materials that it includes. So the second version of that is actually just the original game with the upgrade kit. Now, if you buy that from Decision Now, I believe that is what you are going to get. So if you do investigate DG Storm of Steel, then I would highly recommend making sure that you are in fact getting the second version or one that includes the update kit, because I tried for a couple of years to run down a copy of the update kit on its own, and it is simply not findable by itself, right? All right, so what we are playing, last Blitzkrieg, we're continuing with that. We are into, if I said the 24th earlier, we were actually in the 23rd. We made excellent progress on the turn, right? But then we have, it's looking like an Allied victory to me, just based on where the Germans got stuffed and where they didn't. But we did manage to completely eradicate the pocket containing the U.S. 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions. The 2nd managed to get a couple units out. The 99th was completely annihilated. Mark Ruggiero from Lodi, California. Mark, thanks for stopping by. That's in the wrong pile. Where I'm going to finish this batch of counters in like 10 minutes. So let's talk about, let me pull the share up here. We're at problems here, folks. Sorry about this. All right, that should be it. All right, this is the first piece of news from this evening. This is the Multi-Man publisher update. This is their, visibility on what's coming down the pipeline from MMP over the next probably few months. The next game out the door will be Storm Over Jerusalem. Last call on pre-orders that has already gone out. If you want to see that, I'm sure they sent a copy to our good friends at the Players Aid. So check their unboxing out this week of that. Afterwards, after Storm Over Jerusalem, GTS Briefings, the GTS magazine that includes the SAR game called Strike Counter-Strike, is next in line. I am on the hook for that. Looking forward to it. ASL starter kits, they're working on getting SK1 back in print. So we've already talked about that. I see no reason to belabor the point anymore. SCS Ardennes counters are at the printer. Other components are still being worked on. That's pretty far along, according to Dean. So I would expect that might make this year. I wouldn't like bet $5 on it, but it might make this year. Valley of Tears is very close. This is per Carl's recent blog post. So I would expect Valley of Tears to go up for pre-order very, very soon. OCS magazine is being worked on. Articles are being collected. GCACW on to Richmond 2. Counters should be sent to the printer by June. Other components are still being worked on. GCACW Skirmisher 4 could be ready by WBC. That'd be great. If they send the counters to the printer in June, then I would think that means a no earlier than August release date. So to me, this news indicates that that this is probably going to make this year, but it's probably not going to be the first half of this year, or indeed Q3. GTS Utah, Tom has been sent a list of map edits. Now, I was told that the map was finalized several years ago, so this must be last minute stuff. And there's some other last minute changes that are taking place to that as well. So although we still might see that this year, I'm not holding my breath for it. Information about other projects: OCS Crimea, Crown and Crescent, Line of Battle, The Wilderness. According to Dean, Line of Battle should hit pre-order this year. According to Tony Burkett, who's not the guru, but I assume he's had a conversation more recently than me on this stuff. OCS Crimea should be up for pre-order shortly. The next thing in the OCS pipeline to go on pre-order will be either the magazine containing Luzon or it will be Forgotten Battles. So that will be great. Both of those will be great, and I am looking forward to both of them enormously. So that is the MMP update. The next piece of news is the Golden Geek Awards. Somehow my open window on this has failed. But the Golden Geek Award nominee submission process is open. There is a link in the video description. And I know that folks are going to say, and I'm not going to argue with you about this, that BGG doesn't really care about wargamers and that the Golden Geek Awards are not generally relevant to wargamers, but there is a wargame category. And if we decide to cede the ground here, then that is our call and our decision to make it not relevant to wargamers. So I would encourage you to go over there and vote your conscience on whatever you'd like to vote for. You can vote for podcast and app. I had nothing meaningful to say on any app-driven games, oddly enough. But there are a bunch of great wargaming podcasts out there that you can certainly nominate, and there's a whole variety of different games and stuff like that too. It's probably better that I didn't, that I lost the screen accidentally, because then you'd have seen who I voted for. Although I thought about that, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty much okay with that. So William Byrd was charged for Storm Over Jerusalem today. That is expected that would happen anytime. You're probably getting it pretty soon. Thomas Bandy, New Atlantic Chase coming tomorrow. That's the new printing of Atlantic Chase. Very good. Andrew Atkins would like to go digital for the ASL journals and rules going forward. I am in agreement with that. Clark Commando 1983, Mark, thanks for stopping by. This he has played Storm of Steel and he likes it as well. I think that, like I said, I think that it's an underrated game. I think it's a Joe Miranda design, if I didn't say that before, and I think I did. Then that I think is fairly underrated. I think it deserves a second look. I do not think it is a flawless gem, even with the update pack, but I do think that it's worth a decent look. That said, I suspect that my personal strategic level World War I list, look, maybe I should do that at the end, actually, but that's going to be just the strategic level games. I think number one on that, where I'm feeling right now, and bear in mind I haven't played it yet, looks like it's going to be Fatal Alliances. So I guess I'll give you that. And there's a number of interesting runners up there as well. So Neil Bedke just picked up Home Before the Leaves Fall. Very interesting Clash of Arms game. All right, so moving along to we got other news here. So there's some enhancements to the stream this evening, which I see has been totally ineffective because of the way the window works. We do it that way. I suppose we can do it this way. So this is slightly less bad. So anyway, if somebody subscribes or super chats, and I'll mention super chats are on, it's a great way to get your comment highlighted. Then you get a little thing up in the window, up top of the window, and my everlasting gratitude. And if for some mischance, and I don't believe that this has ever actually happened, somebody subscribes to the Patreon during the stream, then there'll be a fun pop-up as well, which you probably have trouble seeing because of this particular screen layout. So sorry about that. And of course, we got new music, as folks noticed. I got so thanks to a generous supporter who has obtained a membership in a music site for creators. So I figure I might as well use that while I got access to it. So thanks. You know who you are. And I pulled some interesting things. So, and we got a new outro at the end of the show as well. I am just in the initial planning stages. I haven't made this general announcement yet, but there may be a patrons only live stream in early May, where we will talk about things like overall channel direction and how to best deal with certain other topics. Right. So, I'd say Carl, I'd say quite loosely based on Toddler Creek. There's clearly an inspiration there, but it's not that close to Toddler Creek. And I know you're not saying that it is necessarily. So there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, and I can't remember what it is. So I guess we'll just move along and start talking about World War I. So for those wondering if Ted was going to show up in the list, here you go. We're working up in order of reverse order from BGG rank on the topic of World War One. There are a couple I have left out as not as neither wargame nor wargame adjacent, and I have consolidated things like some games that you will see, and you'll know them when you see them, into a single entry rather than the 100 entries because there are 100 expansions for it. So we start out with Clash of Giants. This is one of the two Clash of Giants versions, and I was really, really, really hot to get this for a while, and then that cooled off quite a bit when I started kind of getting more World War One games. And not because my opinion of this changed as such. It's just that there was a lot more traffic in the space than I had previously realized. Now, World War One is, of course, a topic that was like gaming, radioactive waste in wargaming for quite a long time because it was perceived as a dull and boring conflict to actually play. With the release of a game we will get to, in due in large part, I think that showed that World War One could in fact be an engaging topic in games. Then we have seen a renaissance in activity in the World War One wargaming space over the last, say, 20 to 25 years. Um, so there are two games in this series, and I guess I'll I mean, folks are gonna know what's number one here already, right? The game I'm talking about is Paths of Glory. Now, World War One is a fascinating and complicated topic, right? And I should have led with this rather than with Clash of Giants. Um, and part of the reason why it was seen as a dull topic for a game was because of the nature of that sort of traditional view. I think more true here in the US than maybe in Europe, where they experience the stuff directly and where you could like literally walk around in the old trenches that are still there, in certain parts of that Western Front, of that, that sense of World War One as the Western Front during the period when it was trench lines and machine guns and no man's land, and not a lot of movement was happening on that front. And that was true for a variety of lengthy periods of that war, but not for the entirety of that war, even on the Western Front. And on the Eastern Front, it was considerably more mobile most of the time, where the Western Front is punctuated by periods of rapid advance and maneuver, occasionally, and most at the beginning and the end. Um, World War II on the East Front is occasionally punctuated by heavily fortified defensive lines that attackers dash themselves against. So and that's something that just kind of got overlooked as far as I can tell. Not that there was nothing. And in fact, Ted himself had done a number of games, including a couple of really well received ones. The one well received one that's not on this list is When Eagles Fight, which is the Eastern Front. It's included in the 1914 When Glories End, When Eagles Fight dual pack from GMT. I don't think that's available anymore. It is an excellent value. Both games are very good. The Eastern Front one is better. I actually have a playthrough of that riddled with mistakes if you'd care to go watch it. But at the same time, Ted and a few other designers were really working hard to revitalize World War One as a wargaming topic. So interestingly, there's a person watching on Facebook. Thanks very much, Facebook person. Cheers to you. Um, so we got some interesting comments here. Game Joe Perez mentions, and we'll see this in a minute here, that games involving the air war of World War One have always been fairly popular, and that is 100% correct. That is, I think, why we are going to see quite a large number of World War One air games on this list this evening. But we're starting with Clash of Giants. So this is a chip pull game system, as I recall. It's been quite a while since I've looked at this, and this first volume is Tannenberg and the Marne. These sold out at GMT. By the time I even started paying attention, they were both sold out. So clearly these were not, dogs that weren't selling at all. And if we look at the secondhand prices, they're not super duper high, but they're not super duper low either. I would call this so in the process of voting for the Golden Geek Awards, one thing that you may, depending on your choices, find reinforced is that the BGG weight system is bullshit. Like obviously more complicated games are rated lower because fewer people have voted on them. It doesn't make any sense at all. Greenfields Beyond is an SPI classic. Bloody April, Perfidious Albion asks about Bloody April. It looks neat. I have never had it. It's on my want list, but it's fairly low priority on my want list, to be completely honest about it. There's actually some interesting music, not really my thing, but there is actually some interesting music from the period as well. Let's see here. World War One, Jeff Beeler mentions World War One tactical naval games, and those generally have been popular. I mean, we'll see at least one of those here tonight. So Clash of Giants, though, good reputation. I can't speak to it personally. Like I said, by the time I became interested in these, and they look nice too. I guess let me pull up a picture here so you can get a sense of what these look like. I remember thinking these looked nice at the time, and I still think it looks pretty good, but I think the map, if they redid the map today, it would look better. And the First World War by John Keegan, which I guess I'll mention, was a textbook in one of my military history classes, and I think I tossed the copy. It was a beat up used copy, and that's a book I ended up buying again because it's a really good book. And it is an excellent starting place if you are interested in learning more about World War One. So in any event, fairly nice looking game. Looks basically like the second one as well. And again, this is Tannenberg and the Marne. So the other volume will follow the same pattern of having one battle on the East Front and one battle on the West Front. Now, another thing, though, I'll point out about World War One, and this is going to get highlighted in a couple of places here, but since we're starting with Clash of Giants, here we go. Is that perceived static nature of the war during certain periods is also dependent on scale. So you might well find that there is a World War One tactical game that depicts, very small scale actions that did not result in the movement of the front by more than 100 yards or so, but which are nevertheless interesting. Now, despite that, you will notice that there are very few to none of the World War II tactical games on this list. I do think there are some interesting looking ones. There's John Gorkowski's in the Trenches series. John Gorkowski is a very good World War One designer as well. Not sure he has a game on this list though. But that is and I'll have some honorable mentions at the end too. We don't take too long, and we're trucking along. One other enhancement, by the way, and I have to do this after the video for obvious reasons, so it's likely to be done during the week that after the show goes live. Is timestamps will show up at the bottom of the video description. So for those of you who have asked for that, we are making that happen. I have no way to put that together other than doing it manually, unfortunately. So there's that. And we are almost 24 minutes in. We're almost finished with the counters that I had, which was most of a sheet that I had pre-punched. So Clash of Giants, moving on from Clash of Giants, we have To the Last Man, The Great War in the West. Now, this is a card-based battle game that I also know very little about, and in fact, not sure I'd heard of until I looked into this particular game. It is a block game. It's actually like double adorable because it's got, are those stars or are those meeples? Because to my eyes, it looks like there are pictures of meeples on the blocks. They're probably stars, huh? So this game looks fairly interesting, but I cannot give you any impression of it other than it's fairly highly rated by Board Game Geek. And it's got this fairly cool Mobius. I mean, I mean, I know it's not Mobius because he's dead. But to me, this cover feels like a Mobius cover. And it is a type of cover art that we don't see very much of in war games. And I think where we have it has usually not been effective, but here's where I think it is. I think this is a nice cover. Mark, thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. All right, so To the Last Man. Don't have a lot to say about it. I think it's a Nuts Publishing product. Doesn't look like there's another one, but there may be a print and play version as well. So good luck on getting all those wooden blocks print and played. I'm not 100% sure how that's even supposed to work. Raiders of the Deep, U-boats of the Great War, 1914 to 1918. Now, this is a fairly interesting topic, and you will recall that the German strategy in World War II to blockade the British Isles and starve them out using a submarine fleet was the exact same naval strategy that was employed in World War I with submarines. Despite that, all the traffic on submarines is World War II traffic. So for that reason, I think this is a really interesting game. Now, designer here is Ian B. Cooper. And for those who don't know, I don't know that this game is still available, unfortunately. It might be, and if it is, great, go get it if this sounds interesting. This is a what we are now calling narrative focused solitaire game along the lines of The Hunters. And I think The Hunters was a direct inspiration for this. That, of course, is the very well regarded and very good Greg Smith design. For that reason, I think this sounds super duper interesting. Plus, it's not just German submarines, it's Austro-Hungarian submarines as well. It's like there were Austro-Hungarian submarines. Okay, I didn't know that. But there were, and they're in the game. In the Hunters, you know, if you want the Italian subs, you got to go buy Beneath the Med, which, if you're interested in that, is worth having, but it is in a separate box. Those games are not particularly expensive. So this is pretty well regarded by Board Game Geek, and I am prepared to say that they are probably not wrong here. I think the what used to be called the B-17 Queen of the Sky Solitaire model and is now called the Gregory M. Smith Solitaire model is very alive and very well. And this was very early entry following up on the Hunters in that. William Bird says that this is available. World War I submarines may not have been able to go deep, but remember that the World War II submarines weren't that deep all the time anyway, right? They were on the surface most of the time. So we have a bunch of 1 inch by 1/2 inch counters in this. Looks like this is for Sweden Fights On. So that is intriguing and slightly unexpected. It shows you how closely I've looked at these things. Matt Davidson says that Captain Von Trapp from The Sound of Music is in there. That's okay. Jeff Beeler says that some Austro-Hungarian submarines had actual Austrians or Hungarians in them. Many were disguised German subs. That's interesting. I don't know why it's not like they're not fighting the Austro-Hungarians as well, right? So that seems a bit pointless, but I don't know what the political realities of the situation were at that time. So I will let those who are more in the know on that comment. I mean, that's part of the experience of World War I is learning more about this fascinating event. And there's a lot about it that we don't hear. We rely on the media and our, let's call it, educational system that here in the U.S. is not that good. So to teach us about this stuff. So any detailed investigation into World War I that you might conduct is liable to leave you having learned a lot of stuff that you didn't know if you haven't already done that. I'm sure this is true, actually. Germans and the Italians were not at war, but the Austro-Hungarians were at war with them. So, and recall, of course, that Italy was fought against Germany in World War I. Which has some interesting follow-up effects in World War II. So moving on from Raiders of the Deep, we have a pretty recent entry, Brave Little Belgium. This is a Ryan Heilman design, and it may be it's a co-design with Dave Shaw. And this is released by Hollandspiel. Now, I haven't played this, but it is very well liked. Has at least one follow-up that I'm aware of, in addition to the epic Lucky Little Luxembourg. So for those who this is going to be a print on demand type of thing, and it's a point-to-point game with a not super duper intricate maneuver, let's say, and at a pretty high scale. But it is also just Belgium, right? So this is worth your time if you're interested in the campaign through Belgium in World War One, which is not a total cakewalk for the Germans. Let me add, a lot of the fierce fighting all through the end of the war was in Belgian territory, right? Um, so it's not like this is World War. Yeah, okay. So I had a senior moment here. Like, wait a minute, am I thinking of the right game? This is the part of the risk of um having too many games in your head at the time. Okay. Jeff Beeler says that the what used to be the Yugoslavian coast was part of Austria-Hungary until the end of World War One, which is uh well, a lot of it was, not all of it though. Um, but a good chunk of it was. So, all right. Um, Petty Rafeski, thanks for stopping by. Marco has reviewed it. I like Marco as a reviewer. Marco doesn't. Marco's like Venn diagram space of games he's into is much broader than mine. So he does a lot of content that I don't necessarily watch, and I don't necessarily agree with him all the time. But you're not supposed to agree with a critic all the time. Do you actually want a footstool or a critic to give you critical thoughts about the product? You could go and make up your own mind whether it's good or not, right? All right, all right. So moving on. Illusions of Glory, another Ted Racer. So this design is by Perry Silverman, but Ted Racer is the designer of the parent system, Paths of Glory. Of the three games in that system, this is the lowest rated, and it's like number 23 or something like that on BGG. Not direct rank, because like I said, I did skip a couple, but yeah, on this list, it's like number 20. Well, what the hell is it then? If I'm going to say that, it is number 20, 21 actually. This is the Paths of Glory system brought to the East Front. And I believe we have a decent shot of the map so you can have a sense of what that all entails. This could be bigger though. So you've got, it's a card driven point to point game on the Paths of Glory model, directly on the Paths of Glory model. Plus you have an inset map here for the Italian front, which is, I mean, I guess in World War One terms, it's kind of East Front. I've never actually heard it described that way, but here it is. And you notice with a lot less spaces. So, I've never played this. I've never owned this. It is, however, a Paths of Glory family game. And therefore, I think if you like Paths of Glory, this is 100% worth a look. Um, so Jeff Beeler likes that in Illusions of Glory, you cannot send the Bulgarians to garrison Turkey, but in Paths of Glory, you can. Well, that's not really that surprising, is it? Because the games are very different scales, right? Um, there's just more space there, right? And I guess I'll also point out that part of the Ottoman front is on this map as well, right? Down here at I don't see it, but you can totally, drive on Constantinople, right? If you manage to get that lucky, which seems unlikely in World War One, to be completely honest. So, all right. So moving on from Illusions of Glory, we have the Kaiser's Pirates, which is another naval game. You'll notice, and this is a James Day design. James Day is the designer of the Venerable Panzer series, which is also available from GMT. I believe a pile of that stuff was recently reprinted. So this is a card war game of gripping adventure on the high seas set during World War One. So as I've never played this, so I don't know too much about it, but it does appear to be a straight World War One card game. That probably, but not definitely, means that it is fairly light. That may or may not actually prove to be the case, right? Um, already throaty. Oh, Andrew Atkin. He's a naughty boy. Okay. I this is another one I haven't played. Really, card games are really just not my deal. I'm certainly willing to try them under most circumstances, but generally the kind of gaming I like to do war games for is not the kind of gaming that is conducive to being reduced to a card game, or being, I should say, being distilled down to a card game. So this is not super duper on my radar, but it is well regarded, and I am also fairly sure that this is out of print. Um, so next up is one that I do have and have looked through, but have not yet had the chance to play. This is 1914 Twilight in the East. This is by designer Mike Resch. There are a couple other games by Resch on World War One topics that are related to this series. Relatively recent Galicia game in Paper Wars, which I do have, as an example of this. It does have some of the same underlying logic as this series, that what I'll call the 1914s Mike Resch series, but it does not have anything like that level of detail. So I got this in a pretty great deal from a friend. So in which I bought a decent pile of his stuff and um, sold a bunch more stuff for him. So, and that was one of the sales that you may have recalled that we've had on the channel. I'm thinking about doing that again. The fact is, I don't have that much stuff, which might make it a good time to do that, actually, rather than a bad time. All right, so 1914 Twilight in the East. This is, as I recall, a 3 or 5. I think it's a 4 mapper, actually. Might even be 5 maps. The West Front one, 1914 Offensive Outrance, is 3 maps. This kind of looks like 3 or 4 maps to me. I believe designer Mike Resch is responsible for at least the counters and some of the map art as well. And I think in both cases, this is you can't really see it from this picture, but I think this is a pretty sharp looking game. Now, I'll mention, because there's a bit of a complicated situation going on here. So, as Carl Critter from the Wargame Bootcamp points out, 1914 Twilight in the East is slightly different than the other two, Offensiva Outrance um, and Serbian Moose Sterbian. Um, it is a slightly different, and I think some of those changes were in response to what people saw as issues with the Twilight in the East system. But that said, there are people to this day that prefer the Twilight in the East system to the variant of that system that appears in Offensiva Outrance. And certainly this is a game that you'll find that this is really, let's see, somebody's gonna make an idiot out of me here. 330 euros in very good condition. That seems a little high, but this is not a cheap game to acquire. Frank says, why so few hex map games about World War One? Well, we're going to be getting to several of them. This is certainly one, and a couple of the previous ones were. So just looking at that real quick, actually. This is actually the first game that we've talked about tonight, other than Storm of Steel, which isn't on the best of list. This is the first one that is actually on a hex map. I will point that out, and that's a good question. And a lot of the ones upstairs from this aren't, but some of them are too. So this isn't the only one. This is a really interesting question, and I think the answer ties probably into the equally good question of where there's so few point-to-point games for World War II. There are some, but very few, which I think is a very interesting question. strategic point-to-point designs dominating World War II, though, or World War One, I should say. I think part of that is scale, is the choice of scale, because you can, through clever choice of scale, eliminate the problem with large sections of the war. People will think that they're boring, right? This is part of how Paths of Glory gets away from it, because not everything you're going to do or do a card play action with in Paths of Glory is necessarily going to result in a combat. Some of them will, but not. You've got a lot of other things to do. Some of which is building up to back to the combats. So I think that's part of it. World War One is not thought of as a war of maneuver too, and maneuver is where a hex grid shines best, I think. Um, if there are confined, also that may be vary by topic, right? Depending on whether the combination of topic and scale makes more sense for a point to point map. There will be many cases where point to point makes more sense. Peter Bergs mentions Over There, also not on this list. So that is one of, I think, only two volumes that they did in the Glory series, they being Games Research and Design. This is basically the Europa version of World War One. I have actually heard good things about it from the Europa folks, but I think it is reasonable for me to assume that my tastes may not overlap in this particular case. I am willing to deal with it in World War One, World War Two, but for World War One, and Over There is West Front, and Over There is second half of the West Front. I believe 1916 to 1918. I forget where the dividing line is. The first one is the only two they did were the two. March to Victory was the Valkyrie's not on this list either, but I believe it is definitely worth a mention as an honorable mention, because I like that series a lot, and I think it's one of my favorite. I mean, at that scale, I think at the moment it's one of my favorite World War One games. Now, that said, back to 1914 Twilight in the East. I haven't played this, but I have talked to a number of people whose opinion it is that this series is absolutely brilliant. I will mention that there is a new version of some of the material on the Mike Resch support website, which may or may not be linked from here, but it is off of GMT's website. So that is worth a look. And those new rules, maybe, and I'm not sure if those new rules apply to Twilight in the East, but they definitely do to Offensiva Outrance. Jeff Beeler says that in GRD's World War One series, artillery effects replace armor effects. That's interesting, especially considering the way that works. They'd have to change the way it works, but that could potentially be interesting. So I've got this is on my long-term to play list. I'm unlikely to get to it super soon, but you never know. It's also, I think it's pretty attractive, by the way. The counters are fairly dense, and I think maybe the iconography is not as clear as it could be in a couple of cases. And I'm specifically talking about the attachment markers, which I think could be more obviously attachment markers. But that's a feature it shares with the other games in the sequence as well. So it is a member of a small series. There is supposedly something else in the pipeline from the designer, and I'm been curious for years to hear what that is, but I haven't really seen that. William Aarons, we will get to at least one tonight. I can tell you that. There's more than one, but I think in the space of games you're asking about, there's one coming up. And this is, by the way, the highest rated of the three. I'll point that out. And frankly, the other two, Serbian Moose Sterbian and Offensiva Outrance, sat around on sale for a long time, through multiple sales over at GMT. So those do not appear to have been a smashing success, but Twilight in the East sold out relatively quickly, is accounted a fantastic game, and does not appear to be in danger of being reprinted anytime soon. Next up is the classic Avalon Hill Jutland. This is a Jim Dunnigan design, a very early Jim Dunnigan design. This may have been his first design, actually. I'd have to look that up. Um, so another sort of honorable mention, which I guess we'll just get to as we get to them, is going to be the 1914 Nach Paris from VUCA Simulations. I haven't looked at this. This is pretty new. I believe it came out in 2022. I believe that's correct. And it's a very sharp looking game. It is quite big. It's the biggest thing that VUCA Simulations has done so far. I suspect that it's not going to show up on this kind of list, which is built off the BGG. It's just not going to show up because it's too new. What's the most common time scale of these higher rated point to point World War One games? It's generally seasonal. Um, Another one that's not on the list, and I think one could easily find a place for it on here, is Ted's Great War in Europe. Now, this was originally released in Command Magazine, and then there was a follow up game called Great War in the Near East. GMT redid both of the, and these were in Command Magazine. GMT redid both of those as Great War in the East Deluxe, or whatever GMT called it. The GMT edition would be the one you're looking for here. And there's a substantial revision to the rules as well. Now, this I have played. It is back in the days of Command Magazine. I played it, in fact, and we felt like it was a bit broken. But I also think that that got fixed in the GMT edition. So, so all right, whether you're playing it with counters or not, Jutland is essentially functionally a miniatures game. It is, and there's a great picture here of people playing it on what appears to be a party room floor or something like that. I don't know what that is. But it's this kind of thing. So, if you are into this, then, and it's pretty detailed too, by the way, from what I've seen. I've never played this either, but this is one of those kind of classic things that I really do need to play at some point, just because it is such an iconic game. Um, so Jutland, based, like I said, basically miniatures game. You play it on a usually it's played on, at least it's played on a floor. These guys look like they're doing it on a tabletop. And you could play it with the counters if you want, but you could just put miniatures down instead. But that's not just that. This plays like a miniatures game. John C. from the sunny Philippines mentions that Death in the Trenches and The Lamps Are Going Out and An Attrition of Souls, all from Compass. I have Death in the Trenches and The Lamps Are Going Out, and they both have. I've heard a lot less about Death in the Trenches, but it looked really neat to me. And The Lamps Are Going Out has been consistently very highly regarded since it came out. So no secret there. So another interesting thing about Jutland here is there's still people playing it, and it plays pretty well by email, and it plays even better refereed. So if so, and so don't think this is necessarily limited to the Battle of Jutland as such. I mean, this gets used for all kinds of World War One era and adjacent naval engagements. So, I mean, the Jutland historically, I wouldn't expect it to even necessarily be that battle if you sign up for a Jutland game at a convention. So, and Brant from the Armchair Dragoons, who I'll point out, their events are up on the Origins, like uploaded to the Origins website, and you'll be able to get tickets for the Armchair Dragoons and other gaming events at Origins in a couple of weeks, probably about a week before Origins is my guess. It's usually when Gamma opens it up. Correct me if that's not correct. So let's see here. Yeah. So, I guess, I mean, it's not that complicated as far as resolving the actual fire, right? But, it's an interesting, fascinating game. Let me put it that way. All right. Next up is Volume 2 in the Clash of Giants series by Ted Racer, and this is Ypres and Galicia 1914. Same ship pull system. I will point out that the third volume in this Clash of Giants family, by the way, is the Civil War one. So if you really like the system, then you got the Clash of Giants Civil War, which I believe is either available or became not available pretty recently. So I'm going to need bigger baggies for these. So in this case, still chip pull design. Let me pull up a uh I don't know that that's giving you an amazing sense of what this map looks like, but here we are. To me, these have a very typical look of representative of Ted Racers designs from GMT in this period. There's a very similar iconography here between this and say Where Eagles Fight or When Eagles Fight and 1914 Glory's End, and to me, I almost associate this look with Command Magazine, even though it's not the Command Magazine look and isn't really that close to it. And I think Ted is the link there. Um, yeah. So crawling around on the floor is just not something I'm ever going to do. I'm just not going to do that. If this is probably, however, and I'm guessing there's actually people playing this on Tabletop Simulator. This would actually play very well on Tabletop Simulator. Brent says that Origins event registration is supposed to open up on 4/29. We'll see if that happens. That's about 5-6 weeks before the convention. That's not as bad. It's still kind of dumb, but um not so much an argument for digital, but an argument against playing this particular game on my knees, which I'm just is simply not going to happen. We do not do that anymore. Much prefer to stick with something like Clash of Giants. Um, Also very typical like GMT look of hex encounter games in this era. This is 2006 release, so this is kind of a long time ago now, right? Again, well regarded games, worth a look if you're interested. And these are operational, by the way, which is I think if you pick the period correctly, I think is a space that you can get a lot of value out of World War I in, right? I mean, obviously you don't want to necessarily have an operational game of trench warfare where nothing moves. But if you get the battles where there's some actual motion and the front shifts a lot, and there are any number of examples, then operational is a really interesting space. So in that sense, I think these are again worth a look, although they've somewhat dropped off my radar. Next up is the second oldest game on the list, I think, and this is another Jim Dunnigan design. Now, this is Joe Miranda co-credit on here, but that's for the later Decision Games version. They've done this a couple of times. In fact, let's pull that up. So this is the SPI original. This is a really interesting. It's first of all, the map might throw you off. You might think, "Oh, that's so weird," but this is the amount of space that actually got fought over, more or less, right? So there's really nothing wrong with this map projection. It's just it is weird, and Italy looks weird in particular. Um, yeah. So, Charles Latore, yes, you are absolutely right. I can get down there, but boy, getting up is just not a thing I want to undertake. Um, Oy vey. There we go. Okay. Somebody has wondered, Alan Salazar, welcome back. Thanks for coming. Has wondered why nobody has redone Jutland, and that's a great question. The Maybe because nobody's needed to, or maybe because the people that really like it have already adapted it via house rules to the way they want it to run. And then when they do it, they just use those house rules. That's also plausible. And there's not much to it, right? It's rules. It's basically a miniatures game. So it's not like you even need the pieces. You just need like a big floor or something space, and the rules. So redoing it, there might not be a point to redoing it, to be completely honest. Frank says that, oh, I'm sure this is true. Says that Jutland is Jim's Dunnigan's first published design. I think I said that. But I mean, I think most game designers end up having design games before they're published designs. Like I said. Um, Um, Peter Bergs mentions Fear God and Dreadnought is a more realistic miniatures game than Jutland. Okay, I've heard of that because if nothing else, it is a fantastic title. I think we can all agree on that. Um, but this may well be the case. As a miniatures product, however, I'm going to steer clear of it because I simply do not have time to deal with miniatures. So, um, yeah, Chad Kennedy asked, and I missed this. It scrolled off. Asked about the Jeff Phipps Gallipoli game. I believe that's the game he was talking about. There's a number of games on Gallipoli or called Gallipoli or something similar. Um, I think that game system looks very interesting. Now there is a rules update and I believe a charts update that does appear to dramatically change the playability of that thing. So I have it. It's not going anywhere. And at some point I would like to play it. And Jeff Phipps, as we talked about in my interview with him, does have actually I think that I talked to Jeff about it, but not on the interview because the interview aired very shortly after GMT dropped the game, and then Compass went and picked it up almost instantly. Within days, it had landed at Compass, and I was very happy to see that because I really like the look of some of the things that he has happening in that system. Um, Jeff mentions the Great War at Sea game from Avalanche Press. Those are way more of a board game, though. I mean, there's like a search map with squares and then a tactical map. Um, I mean, they're comparable in the sense that they're talking about the same topic on roughly the same scale, but I Jutland is really a miniatures game that happened to have counters in it, and Great War at Sea, which I have taken at least a brief look at, is a straight board war game. I'm sure you could use miniatures if you want, but it would be strictly for appearance. And William Bird mentions Kaiser Krieg from White Dog. This is a super interesting looking game. It's World War One states of siege, basically, which we're going to see examples of if I ever get past this map. So the interesting thing to me about this game, which has been redone at least twice and maybe three times by decision. Um, the second one is this is just an absolutely ridiculous cover for 1994, to be completely honest. Um, so I guess the new edition gets its own entry on BGG, and that's this World War One Deluxe, which I did an unboxing of. It is very nice. The interesting thing here is that Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. The interesting thing is here that there's this sort of I'm not sure what it's called, but there's this sort of like national will that is like everything in the game, just making sure that doesn't go down to below the threshold where you lose and you're doing okay. And that gradually erodes over the course of the war, modeling the degradation of conditions throughout the course of the war. So this is a really very interesting game design. I think I haven't played it, but I have looked at it. It's also quite easy. They put it out in a folio. Best bet now is probably to grab the decision one because it is pretty much the same game and it's got quite nice components, mounted map, and all that jazz. I think they may have added a couple rows of hexes somewhere too, but so super interesting. Relative, well, not it's not early for Dunnigan, but it's early for World War One. Let me put it that way. Um, Wings for the Baron. This is the second edition. This is from Victory Point Games, and I know nothing about this whatsoever. I know that it looked interesting, but I don't really have any understanding of how this thing actually works. This is not really, however, a war game. War game. It's a war game adjacent thing where um, you're basically cranking out aircraft for allies and Germans. Maybe it's just Germans. Which so it's an interesting looking game. Dave Townsend design. But if you're looking for a tactical or strategic or operational anything, then this is not where to look. Moving right along. Hapsburg Eclipse. This is a Darren level off game. I almost called him David. I don't know who that would be. Um, Victory Point Games did a lot of really intriguing stuff. It is too bad that they got picked up by a company that doesn't care about war games, but it is what it is too. And most of these states of siege games are coming back in various forms, which is good because they're kind of all hard to get and expensive at this point. So this is World War One on the for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, I should say, as a states of siege game. So as you can see, there were various tracks here coming in from Russia. Looks like coming in from again from Russia, and then up from the deeper in the Balkans. How does that even work? I'm not really sure how that's going to work. And then up from Italy. So um, this is a well-regarded game. I believe that John Stanley. Thank you so much, much appreciated. Um, uh, in my experience, and I played a couple of them now, and a World War One adjacent one, but not a World War One. Um, I have generally had fun with States of Siege games. I think it's a very nice solitaire mechanic. I think there's probably topics that have been dealt with that um, aren't handled well by it, but I can't think of any examples because I didn't buy those games. So John Stanley, again, thanks very much. Any good games on the British food blockade of Germany? That's a very interesting question because I don't know that there are any games about it, but I think there are games that feature as a thing the British naval blockade. There's I think a good argument to be made that this is in fact what decided World War One the way it was decided, was the fact that conditions inside Germany were absolutely horrifying. Um, Mo says that VPG stays the siege games with the right price for those games. Now they're getting higher end prices. That's true, but you're getting a lot higher end components as well. Not a bad idea. We may adopt this. As predicted, Hitler despises bagpipe music. So, um, John Longshore mentions, yeah, I don't believe any of these are out yet. The Diffraction Entertainment team plans to do a World War One treatment of their system as well. And one hopes they've been pretty good at putting out product. They're a not comparable in that way situation to say HMS. But boy, that's kind of a big project. They're doing good work, I think. As far I respect what they're doing, I think that game's too much for me. Just literally too much of everything. Um, I have low confidence in being interested in this personally. I'm not super interested in the Glory series from GRD either. Um, so, boy, there's a lot of comments here, so I'm having trouble keeping track of them. We have mention of Frank Chadwick's Trenchfoot. Um, Lee Hanna mentions that food points and granaries are included in GRD's Great War series. Is it called Glory or is that the Pacific one? I think it is called the Great War, and Glory is the Pacific one. I only have one of the Pacific games. Kaiser Krieg, as mentioned, is a States of Siege game. William Bird. Well, I don't, but BGG does. So we'll get to it in a minute. Anyway, I have no particular knowledge of Hapsburg Eclipse as such, but I do think it's a viable topic to implement with the States of Siege mechanic. Let me put it that way. Next is Europe in Turmoil, also World War One adjacent. So this is the prelude to the Great War. This is a Chris Van Beurden design, and this has a good reputation and a lot of active players. This uses a relative or variant, if you will, of the Twilight struggle system. Again, it's got a good reputation. It's getting a sequel, which is going to be the interwar period between World War One and World War Two. I'm particularly interested in seeing that. Sort of the interesting thing. This looks interesting, and topically, I am interested in it. However, aside from any reservations I might have with the Twilight Struggle system, which I think worked really well for me in Twilight Struggle and less well in 1989, and I haven't played either of the other ones. I'd be willing to give this a shot, but kind of the weird thing is here that the two players represent sort of these abstract principles, something like authoritarianism and liberalism, or something like that, and that seems to imply that World War One, the situation that results, is a result of ideological conflict, and I think that's far less true than it is for World War Two. So I'm not sold on that like description of the player positions, but I'm not sure I'm clear on how exactly you would handle it otherwise either. At least keeping it as a two-player game. Yeah, yeah. One side is the liberal, and one side is the authoritarian. So this is like I said, highly regarded game. I am more interested in um, Europe and Turmoil 2. This is out of print right now, by the way, but is getting reprinted in a deluxeified edition, so it matches Europe and Turmoil 2 with a mountain map and all that. Yes, it doesn't have a mountain map now. Um, I think the pre World War II situation more closely corresponds to that sort of ideological conflict that just the statement of what the player positions are in Europe of Turmoil provides. Um, this is a great topic for coin. Actually, I think I had another great topic for coin, and I forgot about it. Yep, totally forgot about it. So, um, Carl, creator from the War Game Boot Camp, likes Europe and Turmoil, but doesn't like how they treated the actual war. It was weird. Um, Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't played it, so it's hard for me to say whether I would agree with that or not. The book where future rebels take a time travel to give the Kaiser the atom bomb, not as fun as giving Napoleon a B-52. Don't know what that book might be, and I've actually got a decent little library of alternate history stuff, believe it or not. So Europe and Turmoil. Next up is The Lamps Are Going Out. Previously mentioned, this is a Kirk Ullman game. This has a very good reputation. It is an area movement game. It is frequently cited by people who are asked the question of, I think that Paths of Glory is too much for me, which is hilarious that it's right here. Um, um, so what would you recommend instead that's lighter but still gives some of the same decision space or whatever the criteria are? And invariably somebody will mention The Lamps Are Going Out. This has been through at least two printings over at Compass, the second of which has a mounted map, which is very nice. This is in my library where I am happy to keep it. John C has played Europe and Turmoil. Thanks, John, very much. Appreciate it. He likes it a lot. Very flavorful. The Twilight Struggle mechanic makes it accessible. Naval race instead of space race. That all makes sense. That all makes sense. I think I would. I turned the focus off on this friggin' camera so that wouldn't happen. And it still lost focus there for a second. Um, like I said, I would like to try this. I think what will happen is I will invest in it when the new edition comes out, so I can get both Europe and Turmoil 1 and 2. Um, there is won't make this list, but there is a game on this guy. Lettow Vorbeck was the a German commander in East Africa in World War One. So this is World War One in Africa, which some stuff happened down there. The let's say his he is perhaps most famous nowadays for telling Adolf Hitler to his face to go fuck himself. So that is noteworthy, and this was not a dude you could just liquidate at the time, right? So Lettow Vorbeck is known for that. Steve O says development of lamps are going out by Herman Lettman. I did not know that. That is fascinating. Thank you, Steve, for letting me know that. I'll have to badger Herman about that then. John C. mentions Schutztruppe is the Lettow Forbeck game soon to come from Compass. So there is a folio game called Lettow Forbeck that is from Decision. It's a mini, I should say. And it actually looks decent. It is a very small card-driven point-to-point game. But for all that, it looks pretty good. And we got Cardboard Conflicts has pointed it out before I even got to it. So, that's weird, isn't it? I noticed this as well. It's like, how are we getting past the glory? So this is like extended ad. Ted, I would like a small cut of the commission on this. Lamps are going out. It's supposed to be really good. Moving on. Next is a Charles S. Roberts Award, I think, nominee from last year. Verdun 1916 Steel Inferno by Walter Vdovsky. This is a very interesting looking game, and I haven't played this. It's supposed to be very good. The comments are moving faster than I can keep up with it. It's supposed to be very good graphically. I pretty strongly dislike the box. This box looks like a Task Force Games box from about 1980. To me, I don't like the box, although the art is not bad as such. I don't like this as a cover design. Let me put it that way. The game itself is much easier on the eyes. It's a block game. This has a very good reputation, and I think this is it's Verdun, right? So it is kind of at least semi-operational in scale, presumably. 1914. Crap phone is the only person in the world who likes 1914. No, you are not. That's not on this list. So I assume we're talking about the Jim Dunnigan game 1914, published by Avalon Hill back in the day, and famously thought of as a misfire. But a lot of that is that it is doing a very good job of simulating what was seen as what that was like at the time, right? So as we discussed previously. So there are, in fact, a number of really interesting mechanical features in the Jim Dunnigan 1914. So while I think it'd probably be pretty valid to play solitaire, for example. And I suspect that a lot of the folks who like that game have played it solitaire. So I'm a little unclear on this, Mo, whether the new Mike Nagel thing from War Diary is a redo or merely inspired by the Avalon Hill 1914. I'm a little unclear as to which of those two things is the case. Carl from the Wargame Bootcamp says Steel Inferno is a great game, well worth our time. The art is by a French comic artist that did another World War I game, The Grizzled, which also has gotten my attention. And might have been one I left off of this list, actually. It's not even the art; it's the typeface used. It does not stand out. It completely bleeds into the background. It looks like a cover done by a company that didn't have a professionally trained graphic designer. Let me put it that way. So Mo says that it is an update to the Avalon Hill 1914. Good to know, Mo. Thank you very much. There is a game on the Battle of Tonga. I don't know if it's that obscure. Is it from Legion War Games? Am I thinking of somebody else? I could picture the game in my head. But I'm thinking Legion War Games, but I might be wrong about that. Somebody will correct me. There's a bunch of games that do the Schlieffen plan, including a game called, oddly enough, the Schlieffen plan. There's also a game called Schlieffen's War, which was an relatively last 5-6 years S&T game that actually was received reasonably well as S&T games go. Somebody has mentioned Guns of the Ascari, which also deals with the conflict in East Africa. Like I said, I'm hearing real good things about Steel Inferno. I just don't like the cover. That's like the only negative thing I have to say about it, and it's the only thing I'm qualified to say about it because I have not only not played it, but haven't really seriously looked at it. But it's supposed to be very strong, and I have no reason to think that it is not. I have certainly liked other Walter Wadowski designs that I have been extremely happy with. As you can tell, I'm shifting uncomfortably here. Um, so Tonga is the Tagalog word for stupid, and I always giggle a little bit when he sees that. Well, that's better than the Harn people in Germany, I can tell you that. Um, War game party game. Holy Schlieffen. I found a war game party game. It is called Captain Sonar. And if you have a party of wargamers and maybe a few non-wargamers too, I pretty much guarantee you will have a fabulous time with that. Moving on from 19 Verdun, Steel Inferno is Fields of Despair, France, 1914 to 1918. This is the Kurt Keckley game. So I've played this. This is excellent. It is a block game on a hex map. So there's a lot of hidden movement type of stuff going on. I was very surprised. The hexes were big, right? I was very surprised that this turns out to be quite meaty. I really felt good about playing this game when we were done. It's and I didn't buy it when it was available, and it sold out relatively quickly for a good reason. I think this game is very good. Yeah, I'm splashing myself. Damn it. This may go rather high on the secondary market. Maybe not. Maybe that's cooled off. That's probably a little high. Probably not. I don't know that it's crazy high. It is in, as I recall, a 2.5-inch GMT box. So it's a decent sized game. I want to say the map is mounted. And there's plenty of video on it if you want to see that. So but like I said, I've played this. If you don't object to the block, and it is the stand-up hit blocks with hidden info on one side. If you don't like aggressively dislike that, then I would absolutely recommend taking a look at this. And I think it sounds like Perfidious Albion felt similarly. Not another block game. I mean, I never say to myself, not another block game. I'm perfectly happy to play block games, but I mean, as long as they're war games, right? But I was certainly not prepared for this thing being as meaty as it was. So I understand the sense in which Perfidious Albion was thinking this. There is a reprint on P500. It's kind of been there for a while. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head. I wouldn't count on this getting reprinted. Let me put it that way. Great War Commander. This is a game designed by Roger Nord and Pascal Tupi. I wonder what the is that just a direct collaboration? I'm not sure. Now, the thing is, though, that this is basically Combat Commander for World War One, based on the Chad Jensen Combat Commander series. I have seen. Let me mention this, Carl. Lock and Load Publishing is having a 50% off sale, so go over to Lock and Load Publishing's website and check that out. There's a couple things I probably want from them at this point. John C. in the sunny Philippines is hoarding all the copies of Fields of Despair. So 386 is actually a pretty good number. But interest in Fields of Despair does seem to have cooled off because it hasn't been available. But it doesn't look like it's hideously expensive on the secondary market considering today's prices. I see these get played regularly at Origins and Buckeye Game Fest. There's definitely people that like Great War Commander. It is, however, the Combat Commander series in World War One, and I don't like the Combat Commander series. Petty Rafesky says that the maps for Great War Commander are better than the maps for commands Combat Commander Europe. And I would basically, based on what I'm seeing, I'd probably be inclined to agree. These are a little more colorful, a little bit less boring. On the other hand, I think those Combat Commander, say Europe maps are drawn the way they are specifically to kind of push the ASL button, right, or the squad leader button. These do not have that baggage. I don't know that that was the motivation of whoever did the art on the maps, but that's kind of the sense that I have because they're very reminiscent of ASL. This is from Hexasim, by the way, not from GMT, and not from Chad Jensen directly, but it does explicitly use that system. So if you really enjoy Combat Commander and you're inclined to try World War One in that system, this is what to look at. Next up is another one I haven't played and won't. Axis and Allies World War One 1914. Now I will caveat that by saying that I have heard from a bunch of people actually that this is the best Axis and Allies game. So take that for what it's worth. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But it is got a pretty high rank. But it's Axis and Allies, right? It's got the punching power of Milton Bradley behind it. I will say that I'll pull it up here. I will say that I have always loved this particular style of cover on these games. If nothing else, I thought that I think these covers, which are kind of reminiscent of like a certain type of novel cover, that one might have seen in the say 70s or early 80s, that I was a fan of it then too. But most of the Axis and Allies games have this type of cover, and I think it's pretty cool. It also allows you to play spot the dude who you recognize on that cover. I don't need to really explain this anymore. This is Axis and Allies. It is obviously popular. It is supposed to be very good if you like Axis and Allies. It is designed by Larry Harris, the original designer of Axis and Allies. So he's like still there, which is I think they having the original designer around and participating this many years after the original publication of the thing, I think is pretty cool, particularly in the sense that it's owned by friggin' Hasbro. So they're the least personal company you could possibly imagine. So moving right along is our next States of Siege game, and possibly the last. Ottoman Sunset. This is another Darren Leveloff design in World War One, except that now you are the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe. It's a little more complicated than that, but again, that's another one of those enduring World War One pieces of mythology. Honestly, I haven't played Axis and Allies since the original Axis and Allies. I liked it, but it's like clearly got issues. I don't know to what extent those issues have been fixed in subsequent editions. I understand that they are somewhat different. It is not a game I would elect to purchase today. I wouldn't necessarily refuse to play it, but I would probably not be inclined to spend my own money on it. There are hardcore Axis and Allies fans. I will mention that. So this is Great War in the Near East, 1914 to 1918. It's a States of Siege game. It's by Darren Leveloff, same type of thing. And I'm pretty sure I didn't know this, that you can play this with Hapsburg Elcipse. Does that work then as a two-player game? Because that's intriguing if so. I wouldn't think so, actually. I would think you'd be just playing because they're both, central powers, right? So I don't know that you could split it that way. I don't know. Steve O says that Ottoman Sunset is outstanding, and I'm prepared to believe that. And again, I do like the States of Siege format for these are just markers for a lot of topics, and these two I think work pretty well. There's certainly World War II topics that have been treated too that actually also look pretty good. It's also got a pretty nice cover. I think there's a new edition of this coming. Am I right about that? Currently, maybe that's Hapsburg Elcipse. I think Worthington picked up a couple of these. I know they picked up Soviet Dawn, which I've got playthrough video and unboxing and all that stuff of. And that's very good. I like that too. And that I believe is a Darren Leveloff design as well. So moving on from Ottoman Sunset, we have the first of several, not really the first, Air Games, Blue Max, or is it the last? No, it's definitely not the last. This is a classic from Game Designers Workshop. Designers listed here are Phil Hall and John Harshman. John Harshman is, of course, key individual over at GDW early on. Um, Published in the US, I noticed, this is interesting, by GDW, but published in presumably in Spain by Diseños Orbitales, who also were a Traveler licensee, by the way. So I actually have their absolutely gorgeous classic Traveler slipcase hardcover in Spanish, which I don't remember very much of. So I don't know about 15 minutes, Mo, on this. Mo mentions, and he's quite right, that Soviet Dawn was in C3I. There's been at least 3 different versions of that. I actually have the C3I version as well, and that's the one you'll see in the playthrough video. It's much less nice than the current version from Worthington Games, which I also have, and which is pretty nice. I probably don't need both of them, but I don't foresee being able to dump the first one, anytime soon. I don't know. Maybe I should try that. If anybody would be interested in a copy of Soviet Dawn sold at a very reasonable price out of C3I, but not the rest of the stuff, just Soviet Dawn, let me know. My contact info is in the ticker. So, all right. I think am I right about this? The only World War One aerial combat game I've played, I think, is Dawn Patrol, which I was not a big fan of, but that's a matter of expectations more than anything else. I expected it to be the role-playing game that it said it was on the box. It was not. So I think an hour to an hour and a half is a little more realistic. But then again, I was filming it, so if and that does totally slow you down. So I think this is a little optimistic still. Kilroy says that both are playable either as a 2-player co-op or as a large 2-front solitaire. Rules for the combined game are included with Hapsburg Elcipse. That's actually pretty neat. I think that's pretty neat. I think if somebody will remind me of where the States of Siege games are on the reprint pipeline. Worthington's got a couple of them, but at least one of them is somewhere else as well. Ricky's War is not on this list. Nerd Workshop mentions Richthofen's, with a venerable Richthofen's War from Avalon Hill. I think a lot of folks have fond memories of this. I think that it was a formative war game for many. It was and it's still real easy to get. And if you're interested in the topic and want to explore this early take on that World War One air combat game, then definitely check it out. But I don't think I'm sufficiently interested in World War One air combat to try that. To be honest, I'm more I'd almost rather play Wings of War than play any of these World War One aerial games. To be honest, now the exception to that is Bloody April, which was mentioned, I think. The GMT Bloody April, which is that sort of quasi-operational air system, but it's World War One. That sounds quite interesting. I wouldn't mind taking a gander at that at all. It is on my want list. Please, nobody email me and tell me you got it and want to sell it to me, because I just don't have the money right now. Aces High from 3W, mentioned by Jeff Beeler. I haven't, certainly. I did a decent amount of playing Command Magazine games, but not that one. I would not have bought that issue, honestly, on the strength of a game like that. Just because I'm not that interested in World War One air combat. Again, if you start getting into like the mission planning and stuff like that, as Bloody April does, then that sounds like they're bringing in some things that are of interest to me. But then again, if you really want that, then maybe RAF is the best bet, but it's not World War One. Moving on from Blue Max. Next, we have Pursuit of Glory, second in the Ted Racer Paths of Glory inspired games about other parts of World War One. This is about the World War One in the Middle East in particular. Got a nice picture of Lawrence of Arabia on the front. Should have given that away. But this also has a very positive reputation. You can see that it looks exactly like Paths of Glory because it uses that system. So, a couple more of these, right? Good. Oops, I missed one. But I don't have this one either. There's a reprint, I think, of this coming, which will have a mounted map. The original did not have a mounted map. And on the one hand, I don't really, as a general principle, I don't really care whether maps get mounted or not. However, if there's like one in the series with a mounted map, then you better mount all the maps, right? So, um, so that's just, I mean, that's just only that's reasonable, right? So, um, the new edition of this, which is on P500, which I think it moved up recently, um, will have a mounted map, so we'll be able to address that OCD button pushing directly. Bloody April also good choice for a honorable mention, by the way. Is as who mentioned it? Nerd Workshop mentions tends to go for a relatively high price on the secondary market. So no chance, John C. Not because it didn't, it just didn't. That wasn't like a plan on my part. Next up is in fact Ace of Aces. So this is the Nova games, and they've come out with was Nova, right? Yeah. But Flying Buffalo did stuff for this too, and several other publishers have done Ace of Aces stuff. So this is the flip book system, similar to Lost Worlds, where you have a book, your opponent has a book, and you pick a maneuver out of the book, and then there's a matrix that tells you how those maneuvers interact. This is a perennial. I've never played this. I'm not super into this, but I'd rather play this than Ricky's War. I think this is. I'd have a more interesting experience with this than Ricky's War, I think. So we got 1.5 sheets done, I suppose. We're moving along here tonight at a rapid pace, even though I think my state of mind isn't. Let's see here. John Longshore mentions that mounted maps from GMT is the game and the map come out at the same time, but they send them separately. Not all the time. They only seem to do that with the straight hex encounter war games. Did you notice? Generally speaking, the non-war games just get a mounted map, with some exceptions. I think Mr. President. Actually, I don't know. Maybe that will be a mounted map. I mean, it's Gene Billingsley's game. You'd think he'd get the say, right? All right, we're done clipping for tonight. My beef with GMT's mounted maps is that they pooch badly. The worst pooching. I shouldn't say it. That's a little unfair. I think it's true, but only of maps that are directly comparable. So, like the mounted map from Compass or Decision or whatever. And they do pooch more than those. MMP ever done a game with a mounted map? I don't think so. Ugh. All right. So Ace of Aces is a perennial classic. It is said to be tons of fun. It is pretty high on the overall war ranking over at for all war games, not just World War One. War game, sure, I guess, but not something that I'm terribly topically. I'm just not that into this. Next up is another World War One adjacent title. This is a co-design by Jeff Engelstein and Mark Herman. This is Versailles 1919. I have played this. I've played it once solitaire, and once opposed with a full table. And when we were playing opposed, it was like 1 a.m, and we'd been gaming since we'd been playing Wacht am Rhein since like 8 a.m. Being done at like 9 p.m. So I was pretty cooked in that opposed game, but I did enjoy this. I think it's a very good game. It's it's post World War One. I mean, it's the war is over when the game starts. Let me put it that way. But I do think it's a pretty good game. I don't think it's a war game, but I don't think I care too much. So there's that. And it is I think a 2 to 4 player game, as I recall. The one weird thing about it is it's got tarot sized cards. The issues that you're voting on is their tarot sized cards, which are nice. They feel nice, but you got to buy special sleeves for them. Somebody said something about this came with sleeves, but my copy did not. Or maybe that was a later game with tarot sized cards that came with sleeves for it. That would be great. Carl mentions that he just got to play this and really enjoyed it. Great with the players. I'd want to play this with the maximum table complement, to be honest. Um, Joe Perez makes a great point. Joe bought Ace of Aces at Origins in '78. Closely examining the books, he realized it basically takes place on a hex grid because I think that's how the facing works, right? So and again, I haven't played it, but that's my impression. I was even less interested in Lost Worlds, to be completely honest. Um, but there is kind of an implied hex grid there, right? So I think most people probably don't have that many World War One games unless they are in fact big World War One fans. I'm not sure if fans is the right word, but interested in the topic of World War One. Um, I have, counting individual games, but not expansions, I have probably 15, maybe 20, might be 20, something like that. And I guess that's a lot, but not counting magazine games, because there's at least a couple magazine games on that list too. So, most people that don't have a ridiculously bloated collection like me, probably don't have that many World War One games. So I don't think that's even weird. Rob Johnson mentioned Caesar Rome versus Gaul, Mark Simonich's recent game, and that used the tarot size cards as well. And as John C agrees, so uh, yes, and I actually played the Italians in that opposed game as well. But I do think this is a very good game. I think this is worth your time. It's very much a political game. There is a negotiation aspect to, like, a player to player negotiation aspect to it, not just modeling the gameplay. Which is a thing which is the thing I didn't like about it opposed because I was exhausted. So just like now, how about that? Next up is another series entry. This is The Great War, released by Plastic Soldier Company. This is the Richard Borg Commands and Colors system for World War One. It does come with a fairly nice looking map and little plastic dudes and hex tiles for terrain. There is an expansion for this which adds tanks. At least one expansion. Maybe there's more than one. So if you are, and like all Commands and Colors games, this is, kind of abstract of scale. So you can kind of assume that it's, depending on the scenario, it's operational or tactical or whatever. And it should basically work. So there's an expansion for the French army, French tanks, and Whippet tanks, which looks like that's all out. That might be in a Kickstarter thing. There are, looks like this goes for decent change, I'll point out. And I don't know if there's a plan to bring this back from an active publisher. Um, so I wonder what scenarios are covered here. Is there a picture? I'm not going to sort through 250 pictures on camera because that's bad content. Let's move on. I just wonder what nationalities are included. Presumably the Germans. But then what's the other one? The British, the Americans, what? Next up is Quartermaster General 1914. I haven't played this, but I have played Quartermaster General and actually like it quite a bit. It will remind you of Risk when you like start playing it, but it will swiftly move you away from Risk type territory. I have heard really good things about the World War One volume in the series, but I haven't played it, and thanks to this shitty graphic, I won't get a decent look at the map either. This is actually going to be better. I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan um, of the art, but there's certainly there's nothing wrong with it at all, right? I think the Quartermaster General basic mechanic, where your deck as both your resource that you do things with and your life points, right? I think that's actually quite interesting as it is explored in Quartermaster General. So in general, I would recommend trying Quartermaster General game if you feel like you have any interest in that at all. Wings of War. This is the miniatures game. There, you might be able to get. Are these cardboard stand-ups? Uh, Looks like it. I thought this was with miniatures. Maybe am I? I'm not on dope, am I? Um, Looks like it comes with counters. Nevertheless, this is a miniatures game. I've actually been a little bit tempted by this. This, of course, the one that I picked here is, of course, the card game version of Wings of War. So there is a World War One. I'm not going to try and find it because it's obviously not. This is the thing I might be thinking of. Yeah, this is totally it. Okay. So we're kind of lumping all the Wings of War stuff here together, I suppose. But the card game apparently is really good. This is what it looks like. It's little model biplanes fighting each other. This is actually, if I was going to do World War One air combat, this is probably how I would do it. It's relatively low impact. You don't have to paint the miniatures, and you don't have to do this elaborate terrain because everybody's in the sky anyway, right? But of course, it is a miniatures game, so we're not doing that, right? We don't have time for that. Um, Next up is number one. With the return of Ted Racer to our conversation. This is, of course, Paths of Glory, which is a huge hit for GMT, and I believe it's going into its fourth or fifth or sixth printing or something like that. This has been reprinted multiple times. There was an expansion called the Paths of Glory Player's Guide that included some new cards and some other stuff. That material has been rolled into the current edition of Paths of Glory, and I believe this is back in stock now. So based on the banner ads we've been seeing all night. There are folks who will tell you that Paths of Glory is too complicated. I will agree that for the kind of game that it is fairly complicated. I don't think it's crazily complicated, but it's not a super duper easy game. There's a lot of moving parts. Nevertheless, it's the game that proved to a lot of folks that partly just due to popularity, but that's why it's popular because it's a topic we didn't see that much traffic on, other than from Ted, for a long time. And then suddenly this comes out, and it's like, oh, this is actually awesome to play. It's more a game than a simulation, but there is also a historical scenario that addresses some of the reservations that you might otherwise have. I think the default scenario is tuned to tournament play. I would have done that the other way around, but otherwise, who cares, right? It is an awesome game that I recommend unhesitatingly, and it has ex- inspired a large number of other card-driven games using this model rather than the purer expression of the Hermanesque card-driven model. So, um, Alan Salazar says Ted Racer's masterpiece. I don't know if Ted would agree with that, but I probably would. Um, I think it's a terrific game. It has a lot of replayability. It is absolutely true that the card play is not going to happen in the historical sequence or necessarily be reflective of the event that is named on the card. But that's just a thing you got to deal with to play a card driven game for the most part. It won't say that no CDGs mitigate that. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. And it doesn't really matter too much as long as in aggregate the net effect works. John C says to play it using the WBC historical variant. Agreed. I mean, I think that's just more interesting. It's got nothing to do with strictness to some rule. But I just think it's more interesting to play the historical stuff, right? Cardboard Conflicts would love to stack it up with Lamps as they are often compared, though Lamps is much simpler. I really got to look at Lamps Are Going Out and Death in the Trenches. I mean, I've looked at both of them, but I haven't played either of them. And they are both. Lamps is definitely a one sitting game. That may actually end up happening at some point, not too distant future. We'll see. We'll see if I can script that up in my copious free time. Um, Perfidious Albion says that you could play without the cards and it becomes a conventional war game. Well, I assume you'd be talking about a different game because there's no actual mechanism to just not play with the cards. But functionally, I mean, broadly, I'll agree with this statement. It pretty much, and a lot of CDGs will, right? They'll basically, if you like took the cards out and replaced it with whatever other mechanic, I think you'd end up finding most of those games were just straight war games, right? That are point to point games. Um, Tim Zales has three of them apparently. I just got the one. I probably should replace it, but they probably should put it in a 3-inch box too. So there's that. One thing you might find is that your early war cards get worn a lot faster because you don't play to the end all the time. Perfidious Albion says, "Is it really about World War One as a war game? The high variability of the cards can really create ahistorical events on the extreme end." I mean, this is true, but I mean, the that's going to happen. You could have extreme events in a game with no cards, right? I think there's something that bothers people is that I think you can't do this, but let's say in a hypothetical card driven game, you could play the Brusilov offensive in 1914. Well, that doesn't really make any sense, right? Um, well, the better example is Empire of the Sun, which explicitly does this, right? It's a number of points that sometimes that originate from a specific place that allows you to do things. Okay, um, you don't necessarily have to take the cards of the flavor text title um, as seriously as all that. So this, in some extent, it's just like a thing you have to deal with when you decide you're going to make a card-driven game, right, or play a card-driven game. This doesn't bother me unless it's really egregious, and I can't think of an example on that right now. Well, Stuka Joe has definitely played with his own solo method. I'm pretty sure. It looks cool as a solitaire method. Cardboard conflicts, presumably in response to lamps are going out. Says 5 or 6 hours. That sounds about right. Judging from me watching other people play it. Jeff Bueller says that Americans play Paths of Glory to get the Americans into the game, where Canadians and Europeans use the big cards for ops, so no Americans and often no fall of the czar. Sure, I'm prepared to believe this, and I believe Ted said something to the effect that that's on purpose. That he considers neither the Russian collapse as it happened anyway, or the Americans entering the war are necessarily the most likely options, yet both occurred. Steve O says that Paths of Glory is Ted's masterpiece, put him on the map, and was a major influence for some other World War One games, and not World War One games for that matter. Oh, this is interesting. I'm not sure I remembered this. John C says that the cards for American entry and for the fall of the Czar are ones where you get the event and the ops. We did mention Death in the Trenches, but it wasn't on the list. But I did mention it in the course of the discussion. So it's got three designers, of whom Ben Madison is one, and I don't remember the other people, and I apologize to them. Um, Designed as Absolute Victory, and is also not to the same extent, as far as I could tell, event driven, which to me makes it look super interesting. Imperial Tide is a Greg Smith game. It has I talked to people playing Imperial Tide or Pacific Tide. Pacific Tide has a very good reputation. I have talked. I'm not sure I've talked to anybody that's talked to me about Imperial Tide. Let me put it that way. There's a Civil War Tide coming too, by the way. That was on a table at Compass Expo. Jeff Beeler mentions that they did the same thing that they had to do in Barbarossa to Berlin, one of the rare World War II point-to-point games, by the way. Carl says that he has never seen either the Russian Civil War or American entry. It's still a great game. I mean, if you're looking for a strategic simulation, then I don't think you're playing the right game anyway. If you're looking at Paths of Glory, but on the other hand, it's a terrific game. So, Nerd Workshop asked about 1918, 1919. I presume we're talking about Ted's Storm in the West. That was a release, I want to say 2022 or 2021 from GMT, and it's another reprint of an old Command magazine classic. So I would, if you liked either 1914 Glory's End and or Where Eagles Fight, then I would definitely pick this up. I don't know that the system is all that similar, but actually, Where Eagles Fight and 1914 Glory's End actually have different systems as well. So that's, it's not like all of those had exactly the same mechanics. Alistair Logie, I think the transliterationally correct is with the TS, and that tends to be favored nowadays. Paco complains that there is no Guns of August or Empires and Alliances. Indeed, but I did mention Guns of August as part of the conversation. And it was a principal culprit, of course, in making everyone think that World War I games were going to be all boring slugs. It's a good game. Don't get me, well, it's a good simulation. Let me put it that way. You may not have fun with it as a game. To my understanding, Empires and Alliances goes some ways to making it a little less like that. But I'm not sure that anyone agrees. I don't know. That's just how I feel about it. Lee Ermy, something like that, is the Death of the Trenches co-designer. Yes. We just mentioned Patty Rafesky. We just did mention 1918, 1919 Storm in the West. I haven't played those, but based on Ted's, similar, not the same system necessarily, but similar designs published in the same place in the era, I would have high confidence in picking this one up. I just didn't have, the means to do that at the time. This is also correct. The Russian Tsar and German Kaiser are both from Latin Kaiser, which we in English say as Caesar for whatever reason that English people pronounce things, probably because of the French. Kilroy says that doesn't seem to be taking my clicks either. I just don't have it together tonight. Sorry, folks. Imperial Tide is his favorite card game of the Tide games. Does World War I short, sweet, and decent? Yeah, so those are about 2-hour games, as I recall. So that's maybe 3, maybe 4, but those are relatively quick games. Jeff Beeler says that in one Paths of Glory game, he screwed up and was losing Vienna to the Russians who came through Constantinople. Oops. It's hard to knock France out. I can vouch for that. It's not impossible, but it's not hard. It is hard to knock France out. Let me put it that way. Stacking Limit mentions Red Poppies. This is the John Gorkowski 3-volume series from Compass. I don't know if there's more coming in that series or not. Those look real promising. I've got 2 and 3. Number 1 I'll probably never get unless they reprint it, which seems unlikely. Those are supposed to be pretty good. They are, I believe, company scale or maybe even platoon. I think it's companies. Platoon scale World War I, which I guess I would call grand tactical for World War I or thereabouts. Those look pretty interesting. So I would like to get those at some point. We did mention the Grizzled, and I mentioned that I left it out. I will agree with Mark Hodgkinson about Fatal Alliances. I think that's where I'm at with that space right now. Andre Ford, first of all, welcome to the stream. And looks like he's got that on the table right now, trying it out. So let us know how that goes. World War I, the postcard game. I have no interest in postcard games whatsoever. Paul Sin played Fight in the Skies back when it was, I don't know when they retitled it, actually, when they called it Dawn Patrol instead. But I would have picked it up around 1982 or 1983, and by then it had been Dawn Patrol for quite a while. So they still play this to this day at Gen Con, by the way, Fight in the Skies. And it's a little surprising that didn't make the list, actually, but you got to stop somewhere. Game on the Czech legions adventured to get out of Russia and get to Manchuria to escape. That may be in Triumph of Chaos, but I would consider this a World War I adjacent topic as well. at least at this time anyway. They actually were in the war. Um, RMA 901, first of all, welcome to the stream. Says that the only World War One game they ever played was 1914, 50 or so years ago. Didn't find that game too thrilling. I think a lot of people had that perception, right? I think probably if you play it solitaire, it's probably a more engaging thing. Steve O says, not a fan of red poppies, always seems to rely on 50-50 rolls. Mathematically, I don't think that's quite true, but I would definitely I want to try that system out. Let me put it that way. Eric from Eric's Table Napoleonic Battles. Eric, are you streaming after the show tonight? Did we cover the Cossacks are coming? No, I did not. So sorry about that. And as Matt Davidson points out, that is a Jack Rady design. So somewhat legendary status at this point. Cardboard Conflict says it's company scale, tactical, brutal, morale-based system. That I feel like that series, I'd still call it Grand Tactical. I feel like that series is going to be sufficient for me for World War One tactical purposes. Let me put it that way. No March to Victory, Europa in the Trenches. No March to Victory. We did mention March to Victory, however. Europa in the Trenches. I assume you're talking about March to Victory and over there. So we did in fact mention them a couple of times. Let's see. Alistair Logie has Triumph of Chaos on the way. Be prepared to deal with a large amount of errata, but it is nevertheless possibly the definitive game on the topic, and also is another game that uses the Paths of Glory system. So if you know Paths of Glory reasonably well already, you should have, there's a lot of extra stuff to it, but you should be fine with learning Triumph of Chaos. Trenches of Valor from Victory Point Games. This did not make the list. Was not numerically high enough to make the list. Leanna mentions that he has run a one-shot Twilight 2000 game set in 1918's Siberia with Czechoslovak characters, which would be awesome. Okay, right. So Steve-O mentions that Cossacks was designed by David Bolt. Jack Rady was the publisher as People's War Games. People's War Games was Jack Rady. Panzer Division Lair. So let's put this delicately. There isn't a way in which that I would put the First World War module for war in Europe on a best of list of any kind. Let me put it that way. That said, there's some folks looking at, and I don't know that I'm at liberty to talk about it, but I wasn't sworn to secrecy, but I still feel obliged to not blah, 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 blah. There's some folks that are fiddling with redoing the module, the World War One War in Europe module, as its own standalone thing, and that could potentially be quite interesting. Peter Bergs mentions land ships from Clash of Arms. This is another one that did not make the list. But if you're particularly interested in that tactical, then I think it is something you might want to look at, particularly if you want tactical World War One, but you don't want something like Great War Commander or something like that. Peter Bergs asked about Great War at Sea, which we did mention, or GWASL comp. I'm not sure what that is. Are we talking about the World War One advanced squad leader stuff from Critical Hit? Is that what we're talking about? Says that the scenarios for the Americans are interesting and occur when there was some movement in the battlefield. I would imagine so. I mean, that's when you pick that's when you pick the topic to suit, right, of the scenario. Neil Bedke, we did mention To the Greenfields Beyond, actually, very, very early in the show. But it was easy to miss. I haven't played that. It is an SPI classic Battle of the Marne. Is it the Marne? It's not the Marne, is it? I'm thinking of Home Before the Leaves Fall. Steve-O says that Triumph of Chaos is a love-hate game. Played the first edition. It was intriguing. The second edition was 2 kitchen sink. I really kind of like the second edition. I mean, I do like it a lot. It's just there's a lot of errata. All right, folks. So what do we got going on for the rest of the week? We got the show with Dan tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. We have the unboxing on Thursday, which is ready to go, uploaded. I apologize to the patrons that get shown in the card at the end because I filmed that video and edited it a couple of weeks ago. So a couple of recent new patrons are not included, but they are included on the thing you'll see in a minute. Alan Salazar mentions Empires and Alliances. We did mention it, but not really in detail. Empires and Alliances is a success intended as a successor to Guns of August by Rob Bama. So, so we did mention that, but it did not get a place on the list. I would think that just based on its age and vintage and all that Guns of August is probably more likely to show up on a list like this than Empires and Alliances, which is, I think, no longer available from Compass Games. Invariably, when I decide that I would like to buy it, this Compass Games, they published something, shit, it's out of print. There's been a number of those. So fortunately, one of them was Fall Blau, and that came back. So I was happy about that. All right, so folks, I can barely talk at this point. So I would like to thank everybody for stopping by tonight. We have a new actual outro, finally, after a year and a half of saying I was going to make one. I made one. So I hope you like it. Everybody have a great rest of the night. We'll see y'all tomorrow.